All right, good morning. It's great to be back here. I think the last time I was at the Miles of Possibilities Conference was back in 2016 when it was in Bloomington. So it's been a few years since I've been able to join you all here, and it's a real pleasure to come back and bring some new updates and some new things to the platform that I haven't talked about before. I thought instead of using this time to go over all the history of international fiberglass, that we would spend more time on new developments, new statistics, and what's happening in the Muffler Man world more recently. But I do want to give a few minutes at the beginning of the presentation this morning to talk about the history, just for those of you who haven't heard it before. So we'll do a really quick recap, and then we'll launch into some new stuff. So we're going to start here with Bob Pruitt. This is where it all started. Bob Pruitt was a rodeo man. He was a cowboy. He lived in Lawndale, California. And this is right around 1959, 1960 that he's developing a fiberglass horse trailer. And he was working in fiberglass. He wanted to make a lighter weight horse trailer. And so he started making this horse trailer and marketing in it. And once he had it built, he was taking it to rodeos, and he really wanted to display what a horse would look like in this trailer. So he made like a paper mache horse, and he had it in there, and people were telling him, it's hideous. You should have this lady named Gladys Brown mock you up a horse, because she's a horse lady, actually a horse expert and an artist. And they said she could do a great job. So this is Gladys Brown Edwards. This is some pictures of her working on some of her artwork and horses, and she made a full-size horse for Bob Pruitt to make a mold from. And this was really the beginning of international fiberglass, but at the time it wasn't called that at all. It was Bob Pruitt, and it was Bob Pruitt's Fiberglass Animals. And so this is around in the very early 60s. Bob couldn't do it all by himself, though. He was a cowboy. He wasn't an artist. He wasn't a sculptor. So after Gladys made him that first one, he hired additional artists to continue making products so he could expand his library. And that's exactly what he did. And one of those artists was named Bill Swan. We did not know this in some of my earlier talks. I don't think I knew who Bill Swan was when I spoke at the 2016 conference. But his family has since approached us, and we've learned some of the history, and this has been proven through photographic evidence that he is the first one that created what we all call today the Muffler Man and the first Paul Bunyan, as well as other sculptures that he created for Bob. And this is around 1962. Fast forward a little bit into, maybe by the end of the year, or 1963 probably, you have the Dashew family. And this is Steve Dashew and his wife back in the early days when Steve Dashew was very young when he started building boats and created a company called International Fiberglass. And Steve's dad was a man named Stanley Dashew, who basically was a very successful businessman and helped his young son Steve get into the fiberglass business. And basically what happened was they loved the sea. They loved the ocean. This whole family spent a lot of time on boats and creating boats, and that was Steve's passion. But he wasn't making enough just doing boats, and so Stanley Dashew approached Bob Pruitt about purchasing his business, and especially all the molds, and that's exactly what happened around 1963. And that really filled out the catalog of what international fiberglass could make. Now, instead of just some boats, they were able to create an entire line of products from Bob Pruitt's molds. And this really came to the forefront and took over. You don't see a whole lot of boats in their advertising after that. They all were focusing on the giants and the statues and the animals. And these are some examples of international fiberglass advertising. They created everything from items that restaurants could purchase to giant Muffler Men, as we call them today. And they quickly took that Paul Bunyan and created different versions of it and new molds of those versions so they could basically pop out an entire library of giants very quickly to meet the customer's needs, whatever you wanted to order. This went on for a number of years, and then you have International Fiberglass. Basically, by the late 60s, by 1968, Steve Dashue's focus had shifted from the giants and the animals into construction. And you see here he created a company called Interform, and Interform basically used giant fiberglass box molds to create molds that concrete would be poured in for large construction projects. And so Steve put all his eggs in that basket, and Interform continued on for a number of years before they eventually sold the whole company. So that's the basic history of Muffler Men. You have Bob Pruitt, who started it. You have Bill Swan, who made the first Paul Bunyan. The Dashues purchased all the molds and formed International Fiberglass and really took the marketing to a whole new level that we don't think Bob could have ever done. And then International Fiberglass turns into Interform. They kind of ditch the figures and the animals, and eventually even Interform dies out by the mid to late 70s. Let's go really quickly over the Muffler Men. I thought we could spend a little bit of time. We've done this before, but we could go over the giants that International Fiberglass made. You have here the Paul Bunyan. This is where it all started. This is what Bill Swan made. And these bunions were massively popular. They certainly sold the most out of everything they made. Was these bunions, other than the Texaco Big Friend, which 300 of those were ordered, but those were all almost completely destroyed. So the bunion really is what was made the most of, and certainly what survives the most today. And you can see here from these pictures that they were used for a wide variety of advertising, but auto stores, used cars, used and new car sales lots, they were very popular with these. Then they basically made another head version that got rid of that knit cap and flattened out that beard, and made a clean-shaven version, and we call these standards. Unless they're wearing a cowboy hat, then it's basically a cowboy. But the pant leg goes all the way down to the top of the shoe, and it does not have a beard. And these were used for a lot of different purposes. It was really what the customer wanted that International Fiberglass would make. Then they quickly went on. You remember this is advertising now in the 60s, so it was quite different back then. Native American Indian versions were very popular, especially with amusement parks and car dealerships. They made a Chief and a Brave version of the American Indian that could be purchased. The gas and oil industries were big into these guys, and just about every gas station got some version or other of a Muffler Man. Texaco, this on the right here, you see an early version of Texaco guy. This was before the Texaco Big Friend. This is when they were using regular Muffler Men. Mobile gas also used them. You can see a Bunyan here being used by American gas stations. And Gulf Oil did a little different take. They used a bow tie version with a specific hat for their golf guys. And these guys are super cool and rare. I'd love to restore one to original paint color and specs. But right now, none of these guys have survived in their original paint scheme, although there are a few around that have been modified. You can see here some other examples of gas stations using Muffler Men. Of course, the Phillips 66 ordered dozens of the cowboys, and many of the surviving Muffler Men are original cowboys from the 1960s. International Fiberglass wanted to cater to specific needs. 1960s, you got the space race. It was a great time to make a space version. And so 3 of these giants were made to our knowledge. Steve Dashue has indicated that possibly more were made, but we have only seen photographic evidence of 3 of them. These are the 2 that no longer are with us. The one on the left was used in Los Angeles at Astro Oil gas stations, and then the one on the right is used at Coney Island in New York, Astro Land. And both of these are now long gone. Of course, we all know what the survivor is, and that is the Gemini Giant, who actually just recently got set up back in Wilmington, looking fantastic. So you have also the food industry was very interested in Muffler Men. These are some examples of what International Fiberglass was doing in the food industry. You can see the guy in Malibu, the way he originally was made, with his chef hat and his burger. And that's the way he looked when he was first installed. And then you also can see a use here by Waffle House of using a Muffler Man, although we don't think that they use them. This possibly is the only time they actually used it. It was probably a trial. They were testing things out. But we've never seen any other pictures of Muffler Men being used at Waffle House. Here are some other postcards and images of restaurants using especially the Paul Bunyan. The lumberjack figure made a great addition to any Paul Bunyan restaurant or anything that had the Paul Bunyan or lumberjack name. The Bunyans were a perfect fit with that large axe. The Snurds were... We believe that they were modeled after Alfred E. Newman from Mad Magazine, but for some reason they never called them that, probably copyright issues, and they were called Snurds. But these guys were very popular at amusement parks, mini golf courses, game arcades, those kinds of things. And quite a few of these were actually made. And then, of course, Uniroyal Tire came along and wanted something different, and the Uniroyal gal was created just for her. They called her Miss Uniroyal back then, and they probably made over 20, possibly more, maybe 30 of these giant ladies that toured America on trailers and had a rolling stand, and she could be deployed at a location that sold Uniroyal tires and then moved the next week down the road to the next place. And these moves were accompanied by a lot of advertising in the local papers where you could guess her weight and win a prize and all kinds of things that they took advantage of. And so this was quite a successful program, and quite a few of these original ladies can still be found across the country today. Of course, I mentioned the Texaco Big Friend. This is one of the largest programs that they did with Texaco. Texaco ordered a unique giant that was made by an artist named Sasha Schnittman. And Sasha really took this to the next level. He spent way more time designing it than Steve Dashew would have preferred. And he also took the liberty to make the giant larger than Steve wanted it to be. And because Steve did not monitor the process closely enough, Sasha got away with it. And it actually cost more of International Fiberglass's money than they would have liked to create these. They were also massive. And because of that, they caught the wind. They often blew over. And it was a headache and a nightmare for Texaco, and it wasn't but a few months into the program that they canceled the entire program, and today only 6 of these remain. We were able to find one of the 6 remaining ones. You can see a picture on the left there of how they looked in the mid-60s when they were being used. Basically from late 1966 to about July or August of 1967, and then it was over. But you can see the painstaking work we did to recreate and restore that giant as closely as possible to the way it looked when it was first made. So, now that we've gone through some of the basic history and the kinds of Muffler Men, all stuff I've talked about in the past, now we're going to move on to some new things, new material that's relevant in the last few years. So, as you know, things died out in the 70s with the Giants. A lot was changing in the advertising world. They were kind of considered old news. They were getting hard to ship. The price of resin took the price of the Giants up, and companies just moved in new directions for their advertising. They were actually basically considered eyesores in much of the late 70s and the early 80s, or the entire 80s and 90s. At the end of the 90s, we start seeing a little bit of interest in them and their history, but nothing significant until the 2010s when this craze and Route 66 following took over, and a lot of people became interested in the Giants again, and you saw an interest from businesses to obtain them. This is me and the guys that were part of the early crew of American Giants doing our first YouTube series with the Giant in Atlanta, Illinois. Future home of the American Giants Museum. Little did we know that would happen when that picture was taken. And you can see here as the years went by, more and more business owners were buying these guys. That's me in the upper right there in Blue Ridge, Georgia, with a guy that was pulled out of Chicago, visiting the owners and talking about its restoration. Then, of course, you saw Buck Adams come to the scene around 2017 or 2018. He was kind of leading the charge on this new breed of Muffler Men that were being made and customized and being placed on Route 66. In addition to that, you also have changes in the merchandise world and selling miniature Muffler Men. Of course, it was nothing new. In the upper right there, you can see that a Paul Bunyan miniature was being made as way back as the 60s at the Lumberjack Cafe in Flagstaff, Arizona, to actually advertise and promote the first Muffler Man ever made. That was a Bunyan by Bill Swan. And they ordered hundreds of these little porcelain guys from Japan. They also sold postcards and coffee cups and other things you could buy in the little gift shop. Well, that trend has come back. It was started by Scott Farmer a number of years ago as he made sculptured Muffler Men. Some of the larger images in that lower right picture are from Scott Farmer and Sculpture Island. And then you have a guy named Mike Taylor who came along in the lower left picture last year and started making hundreds of 3D printed Muffler Men to basically make whatever version met your fancy. Texaco Big Friends, Bunions, the Gemini Giant, Vikings, you name it. And he went to great detail, great lengths to get the detail just perfect for those. And we actually, at American Giants, were able to work with him quite a bit in those early days and help him with pictures and getting these details right. So I really appreciate his attention to detail when recreating these small figures. In the upper left there, you can see that also bobbleheads have become collectible. And as you travel Route 66, there's quite a number of these different bobbleheads representing different giants that you can collect. The Gemini Giant, we have the Texaco Big Friend here, there's a hot dog guy, and many other giants now that you can order or buy on your travels. All right, let's talk about the companies that are involved in Muffler Men today. We all know that International Fiberglass is long gone, so who's making a difference today in the Muffler Man world? And I'm going to start by talking about Regiant. Regiant actually started out as American Giant Restorations, and that was basically us. That was me in the early days getting Muffler Men that needed restoration and using guys I worked with at my job at the time. And creating a small crew. Over time, they became fiberglass experts and really went all out on their restorations. And that's what American Giants Restorations became known for, is really top-notch restorations with incredible paint jobs. In early 2024, basically that company became Regiant. And American Giants is me, and I went on to work with a museum and loan my statues to them and continue the historical research, also aiding in buying and selling of original giants, while Regiant became its own company and continued what they always had done, and that's great and fantastic restorations. And as you can see here in the picture on the left, they restored the Gemini Giant in 2024, as well as transport giants, take them down, set them up, and anything to do with giants. And that's Regiant. Regiant does not, however, make new Muffler Men. They specialize in restoring originals. When it comes to new Muffler Men, the first on the scene was Bell Plastics, run by a guy named Bruce Kennedy in Hayward, California. And Bruce obtained a few Muffler Men and made molds of them, and was really the first one in the modern day to recreate Muffler Men for customers. However, Bruce uses a third party to do this, and so he is kind of held back by the availability of this other company to make the Muffler Men. So not a whole lot of Muffler Men have been made by Bell Plastics, although there have been a handful of Uniroyal girls, and as you can see here, the Mobile One Giant that's now at the Highway Cafe in Oklahoma permanently was made by by Bell Plastics or Bruce Kennedy, as well as the Mike, the Atlantis plumbing guy that stands in Dallas, Georgia. These are Bell Plastic models. Much more popular and well-known, though, is Mark Klein, who's an artist out of Virginia. And I met Mark a long time ago in 2015 with one of our first restorations we needed some body parts for. And Mark, at the time, only had the 14-foot bunion that he had acquired and made a mold from, but heavily altered the face of that to make what we call the Mark Klein Soda Jerk. And by far, that's the most he's made, is this version he's standing next to here on the right, which is Carl, which is also on Route 66 in Bloomington. However, with our help, Mark was able to get some larger Muffler Men at his shop and make molds of the big guys. And from that came a whole army of Muffler Men, like Louie, that is in Missouri on Route 66. In Springfield, the chef there is on Route 66. And this picture on the lower left is a custom tow truck man, that was made for a customer in Hot Springs, Arkansas. So Mark started just pumping out all these Muffler Men. He also was making replacement body parts for those who needed it. In the upper left there, you can see 2 replacement heads that he's made. One of those replaced a stolen head in Arizona. The other one went to go on a Muffler Man that's being used in a classroom in Idaho. I'm all for that, educating kids on Muffler Men. On Route 66 near Cicero, you have the Cigars and Stripes Muffler Man. That's a custom Mark Klein job. And of course, we have Buck Adam that we mentioned, and the new edition Stella, which just went up in 2024. All creations by Mark Klein. What I really like about what Mark Klein is doing is he is mirroring what International Fiberglass did back in the 60s. They would take the customer had a desire, and they would go to their mold yard and basically make the best giant for that customer. And in the left side of the picture here, you can see an original Jesse James figure that they made for a customer for Jesse James territory in Sullivan, Missouri, back in the 60s, a long-defunct amusement park. But this giant man used to stand in the parking lot, and it was made by International Fiberglass, and they basically took a standard Muffler Man torso and put a waving giant head on it and made a custom beard and hat and gun. And on the right side, you have Mark taking a waving giant body, but putting a regular Muffler Man head on it with custom beard and hat to make it's a waving giant, but it's kind of a fantasy piece for Texaco Big Friend that went to Galena, Kansas. And so you really have Mark kind of doing the same thing that International Fiberglass did. Mark also made Buck Adams, which is an icon of Route 66, getting almost as well known as the Gemini Giant. And this is a picture of me and the Regiant team putting him up a number of years ago in Tulsa. All right, let's talk about some new stuff, some figures and giant totals that I've never really gotten into before. Let's take a look at some numbers here. In 1967, let's assume there were 700 giants made, or around that time period. Now, we don't have an exact number. Unfortunately, we have no idea how many original giants or Muffler Men were made, but we know that 300 were made for Texaco, and probably another 300 or more were made for other customers, bringing a total giants to, let's just say, 700. We don't know for sure. By 2005, you can see how many of those giants were either missing or destroyed. And in 2005, there was nobody making remakes or new giants. So that number had dwindled down to around 300 or so, maybe just under 300. By 2014, you can see those numbers are changing as people like Bruce Kennedy and Mark Klein are starting to recreate Muffler Men from molds they took of originals. But the craze really didn't catch on until around after 2014, when things really got kicked into high gear. And if you look at the numbers now for 2024, you can see that we're approaching 350. So that graph is moving up as demand for these giants increases, and we start seeing more and more of them appear on Route 66 and other places across the country. All right, let's look at some numbers connected to specific giants. Now, the blue represents the originals, and the colored area to the right of that would represent remakes, so new giants being made either by Bell Plastics or Mark Klein. You can see that by far the bunions are the ones that were either the best survivors, but most likely the most made by International Fiberglass. And around 50 of these giants still exist that are original, and just a few remakes of the bunions exist. Not a big seller in today's market. However, the standards, which can be customized very easily, that clean-shaven version, there's a lot more of those. You can see just over 30 originals exist, but quite a few remakes have been made. The Cowboys, just under 30 originals and no remakes on those. And the Uniroyal Girl, about 16 or so originals and quite a few remakes have already been made as those numbers approach 30. The 14-foot versions, the smaller bunions, those were not big sellers for International Fiberglass. Steve Dashew admits that they thought that would be a big win for them to make these smaller versions, but they didn't sell very well. Under 20 originals on those, but there's more remakes than originals because of Mark Klein, and especially those Mark Klein versions soda jerks that he's just made a ton of. As well as other customized versions of those 14-footers. You have pretty low numbers on the Indian Brave and the Indian Chief, and the Pioneer Men with no remakes being made. Original modifications, these are custom giants, like the Gemini Giant, and Buck Adams would fit in this category. And you can see quite a few remakes have been made of customized giants. Snurds, just over 10 of these still exist that are original with no remakes, as well as Vikings. There are no molds that exist or remakes of the Vikings. And the Big Johns, the original molds were found by us a few years ago and sold to Mark Klein, and he has started to make new ones of those, so you can see that reflected there. But just over 10, around 10 original Big Johns with a few extras being made. All right, now we're getting into the low numbers, the giants that there's not very many of. The nitty-gritty stuff, the bow tie versions, the Mr. Bendos, a few copies of those were made. The Big Friends, with no copies being made of those, only 6 remain. And then the Waving Giant, Mark Klein has gotten a mold of those, so you can see that only 4 originals remain of those, but Mark has is starting to make more copies of them. All right, let's talk about the path to the museum and some recent developments with Muffler Men. This is me with the Texaco Big Friend that is now on display at the American Giants Museum. This is how he looked when I found him back in 2011 when he was in Pahrump, Nevada. And in the lower right, you can see pictures of how he would have looked when he was brand new. And really, the museum was centered around this guy's restoration and his history. It took a number of years for us to restore him. We had a lot of other giants that got in the way and bumped him to the back of the line. But everything was moved forward in 2024. in late 2023 when it was time to get him restored and put up at the American Giants Museum in Atlanta, Illinois. And here you have the Regiant crew working on him, some pictures from his restoration and sanding, getting him in primer, making sure we had the original colors, all dead match, and the stickers to get him just perfect. The American Giants Museum really came about because of the need to find a home for my collection. I didn't want to sell it, but I didn't like the fact that it was being stored in a barn. And I really wanted the public to enjoy this collection. And so here you can see some of the items that I've collected over the years: Vikings, Snurds, different Muffler Men, the Texaco Big Friend, Bob's Big Boy, S.O. Tiger, and all of these items needed a home. The Bob's Big Boy actually is a brand new addition. Here's some pictures from just at the end of 2024 when I was able to get him out of South Carolina, and he's perfect for the museum in his vintage condition, and we got him installed there the same weekend as this conference. And the American Giants Museum, really the background is that I needed a place to loan my Giants to, but I could not afford a building or didn't have any resources along Route 66 to make that happen. So a partnership was formed with Bill Thomas and the Atlanta Betterment Fund in Atlanta, Illinois. And basically, his organization was able to purchase the land and build the building, which was loosely based on a Texaco station, to house the Texaco Big Friend and all the other Giants, many other Giants that International Fiberglass made. And the purpose of the museum is to be an attraction on Route 66 and educate people on the Giants. And you can see there the Texaco Big Friend at the American Giants Museum. The grand opening happened in May 2024, and it was a great time to meet a lot of people that I have had dialogued with or emailed with over the years. And we had a great turnout of people come for that. We had the Texaco Big Friend go up. We had the Gemini Giant stop in town on its way south to get restored. And I had purchased another waving giant at the beginning of that week that also was on display there for the ribbon cutting. And now this museum is open during the Route 66 summer season. The grand opening, the highlight of it was really to set up the Texaco Big Friend. This is a massive statue, a few feet taller than the regular Muffler Men, so it was quite a feat. It came in a little later in the day than we had hoped, but quite a few people stuck around to watch it, and we were thankful for that. And many of you have asked, well, what's coming next? What else? You have a lot of empty slabs there next to the Snurd to the right of the museum. What does the future hold for the American Giants Museum? And so we want to talk a little bit about what we have in our collection. This is a Midas Man made by International Fiberglass for the Midas Company, and they called him King Midas. And so we have acquired one of these, and our hope is to restore him eventually and get him set up at the American Giants Museum. We also have a Bunyan that came from Magic Forest. That's how he looked when he was at Magic Forest and previously at the Danbury Fair. And he was restored a number of years ago and used by Netflix. In the lower left, you can see him being used in one of their Florida Man episodes. We have the Waving Giant, which is what I talked about, that made its appearance at the grand opening for the American Giants Museum in 2024. This was pulled out of a building in Bartlett, Illinois, and purchased by American Giants. And we also have a Viking that is not part of our collection, but will be on loan from another collection, and that is coming out of Virginia, and it's almost fully restored and going into paint. It will be there for the 2025 season, and we're very excited about that. We also have a Phillips 66 Cowboy that's being restored by Mark Klein, and it's an original from Macon, Georgia that I pulled out of the woods in early 2024, and we're really excited about it being restored back to its original Cowboy Phillips 66 look. So now that we've talked a little bit about what's coming to Route 66, let's talk about what's on Route 66. And I thought we would kind of wrap up this presentation by talking about the Giants that are currently on Route 66. So you have the Giants of Route 66. The first one near Chicago is the one at Cigars and Stripes. It's actually a Mark Klein remake, and it's missing the lower half of its legs. It was made specifically to be on the roof. Then you have the Gemini Giant, which is now back in Wilmington and fully restored by the Regiant crew and stands in a new park area of Wilmington, and with a fantastic paint job that they did their very best to get original. So they basically looked at the original layers of paint and the metal flake and the colors and matched it. Next, you have Bloomington. You have Carl in Bloomington, which is a Mark Klein 14-foot remake. Coming down on the route, you have the Bunyan in Atlanta, Illinois, joined by currently the Snurd and the Texaco Big Friend across the street from him. And the Gemini Giant, of course, was just in this picture on his way south for restoration. But other giants will soon join these at the American Giants Museum. A few blocks away, you have Lumi, which is a Uniroyal girl made by Mark Klein in 2024. And she's also in town. So Atlanta, Illinois is quickly becoming the land of giants. Moving on down to Springfield, you have the Lauterbach Man, which is a longtime Bunyan fixture in Springfield on Route 66. And not too far away, you have a Viking that's at a school that can also be visited. Motorheads recently purchased a Mark Klein Big John, which is a new remake from the original mold, and he is now at Motorheads in South Springfield. Coming on down the route in Livingston, you have an original 14-foot Paul Bunyan that has Harley Davidson written on his shirt at the Pink Elephant. And as you go into Missouri, you run into, you have the Jesse James I talked about earlier. The remnants of him are in Cuba. Not quite on the route and sometimes a little hard to track down and find, but he's in that town. And then you have Louis a little farther south on Route 66, the mayor. And he is a Mark Klein remake, as well as is the Chef in Springfield, which was made during COVID. Unfortunately, the business did not survive COVID, but the Muffler Man did, and he is still there on this vacant lot, and you can stop and get pictures with him. In Galena, Kansas, you have a Waving Giant, or a fantasy piece of a Texaco Big Friend, and he was put up in 2024, and he was also made by Mark Klein. And then you have Big Bill at the Highway Cafe in Oklahoma that was made by Bell Plastics, one of the few Bell Plastics versions made. Of course, Buck Adams in Tulsa, along with Stella, and right across the street from them, you have Big Mac, who is an original Paul Bunyan that was in the Chicago area and originally came from New Mexico or Arizona, I believe. So a nice cluster, Meadow Gold Mac, actually, not Big Mac, but he is nice, joining a nice cluster of Muffler Men there in Tulsa. And then as you head on out, you have the Indian Chief in Calumet at an antique store. And then you had two giants in Grove, which were both sold in 2024. They were both original cowboys. And this one is going to be relocated to Yukon near Oklahoma City. So he is staying on Route 66. As you head out Amarillo, you have one of the Glenn Good remake Waving Giants that stands at the Cadillac Ranch there, or near Cadillac Ranch. And as you head on out, you have an original Phillips 66 Cowboy in Gallup, New Mexico, who's a longtime fixture of this used car lot. You have an International Fiberglass original mannequin version that replaced, you notice the picture on the top right is this goofy-looking lumberjack that I never considered part of the family. But come to find out, he's actually what they called a mannequin version that wore real clothes when they were made, and he was a chef converted into a lumberjack. And the reason they got him was because the original Paul Bunyan lumberjack you can see in the lower right picture burned down in a fire that stood at Schaffner Lumber. And so this guy was purchased to replace him. And he does have international fiberglass history. So it's kind of a cool story. And I do count him as a Route 66 Muffler Man. I didn't used to, and I took a lot of heat of that heat from that from locals, but he is in fact part of the group. And then as we head out west here, you have the original bunion that Bill Swan made for Bob Pruitt, still in Flagstaff, as well as the second bunion ordered by the Lumberjack Cafe from International Fiberglass, and they have some differences to them. And then, of course, Chicken Boy is the only Muffler Man on Route 66 in California, and that is an original International Fiberglass body with a chicken head, I believe, made by another artist. So you can see, if we look at the big picture here, that 90% of the Muffler Men that are out there are not on Route 66, while 10% are. 6% of those are original, and 4% are remakes. And we expect to see this graph change over the next few years as the remakes start to catch up and probably overrun the originals that are on Route 66. I thought I'd end the talk today by talking about a few victories and failures. I don't often get to share personal stories from my experiences with Muffler Men, so I thought I would do that. On the left there, you can see me with the Texaco Big Friend. We pulled out a Prump. Obviously, a big victory for American Giants to land one of the 6 remaining Texaco Big Friends. We also were able to get a Viking from Magic Forest. Big win, big victory. We got original Native American chief there in Arcadia, Florida. Pulled it out of a swamp at a campground. That was a big win for American Giants. So we've had some really great success stories in rescuing these giants. But I thought I would tell you about a few stories that did not go quite right. And I have never talked about these publicly before, but thought you would enjoy them. And this is the story of the 2 big friends of 2022. This was a rough summer for me. On the left here, you see a Texaco Big Friend that was in somebody's backyard in Detroit. And on the right, you have another Texaco Big Friend that was in Niagara Falls, New York. And that year, I was able to get in contact with the owners for both of these, and each of the owners agreed to sell me these Texaco Big Friends. Let's talk about Texaco Big Friend number 1. This was this was found in a field. You can see it there in the upper left in Montana at an oil plant, and it was abandoned in the back lot of this oil plant or bulk plant many years ago. And in the 80s or 90s, it was found and purchased by a collector who sold it to a man in Niagara Falls who was a Canadian who had it repainted to look like a Canadian Mountie or the policeman that would ride the horses. And it's an original Texaco Big Friend. And he agreed to sell it to me in the summer of 2022. I was all lined up to go purchase the guy when I was told that he had decided to keep it. Well, what I didn't know was that some good friends of mine in the collector world of Muffler Men had also discovered it around the same time and had been able to get in contact with the owner and offered him more money than I did. And so what I didn't realize was happening was, instead of me showing up to purchase him, they showed up to purchase him. And it wasn't long before they contacted me and told me about their big find, and I realized why it wasn't sold to me. Mark Klein did a bunch of the restoration work on him, and then it was shipped to Regiant for the completion of the restoration work. All right, so that was a heavy loss for me in 2022. Big Friend number 2, though, was going to be a win. And that was my second go-to. And that was an amazing story of a Texaco Big Friend being saved by the Texaco owner in Detroit when the program ended in 1967. And he brought the guy home to save him. The legs were laying on the ground, and he cut up the torso a bit so his kids could climb in and look out the holes. And it was a great playground attraction in their backyard. Well, 50 years go by, and the thing is still in the backyard of the family home. And I was able to get in contact with them, and they agreed to sell him to me. And until a few weeks before I went to Detroit to pick him up, I received a phone call that unfortunately the granddaughter of the of the original guy who saved it decided she wanted something to remember her grandfather by, and she had decided to keep it. Well, you can't argue with that. So I licked my wounds and, dealt with my loss, only to find out and get a call from Robbie Wolf a few weeks later of showing off his brand new Texaco Big Friend. And what had happened was a local collector had a friend who was repairing some things in the backyard where this Texaco Big Friend was. And he showed him a picture of a clock on the back of the house. And he said, well, hey, never mind about that clock. What's that giant in the background? And he said, well, that's an old Texaco Man. And so this guy went down and bought it on the spot out from under me. And then the owner told me that it was just going to stay in the family, which obviously wasn't true. And here's a picture of this Texaco guy getting loaded up and headed out. And, of course, then it was sold to Robbie Wolf, who called me and let me know that he had it. And I was devastated. It wasn't long after that my friend Lee Wood purchased the Texaco Big Friend, and Regiant has been restoring that Texaco Big Friend along with the one at Niagara Falls. So both of the Texaco Giants that I was trying to purchase in 2022 are actually at the Regiant shop. Anyhow, just not owned by me. But it's all good. I'm excited to see these guys going up and being fully restored to their Texaco Big Friend glory. And that is my 2024 report of the Giants of Route 66.